name on this or what?
Yes. We're talking today with Mr. Richard Gillard, is that right, of Muskegon, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Mr. Gillard, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself? For instance, where were you born?
Okay, I was born in Muskegon.
In what year?
March 14th, 1919.
Okay. Now, what did your family do?
My father was a salesman with E.H. Sheldon Company, who made school lab equipment. My mother was a housewife who had been the first female clerk in a bank in Muskegon. And kind of interesting to me, at least, that my dad was in Russia with the 39th Infantry Division, called the Polar Bear Division, at the time I was born. 23 years later, I get drafted and end up in the desert, whereas my father had been in the cold Russian area near Archangel.
Okay. All right, so your father then had been in the service?
He had been in the service also. He also ended up a corporal.
All right. Now, let's see, did you finish high school?
I finished high school.
And which high school did you attend?
I went to Muskegon High, graduated in '37.
Okay. And what did you do after that?
I went to community college in Muskegon for 2 years, and then I started at the University of Michigan. I anticipated being in dentistry. I found that I didn't have any aptitude whatsoever for the physics and the chemistry that I needed, and so I quit and went back and started working at Shaw Walker Corporation in Muskegon, who made office furniture.
And what kind of work did you do for them?
A variety of work, primarily in making index cards, and I was drafted from there.
And when were you drafted?
I was drafted, I went to Fort Custer in July 6th of 1942.
Okay. Now, before you were drafted, once Pearl Harbor happened, were you expecting to be drafted? Did you figure that was coming, or?
I've usually been very unfortunate on winning things, but I didn't waste too much time getting drafted. I was very eager, as most young people were then, to do my job, and so I was glad to have been drafted and gone. Kind of interesting, my mother's birthday is on the 8th of July, and she and my dad came down to visit me at Fort Custer, and I was on a coal detail, dirty as can be. My mother was very disappointed. I'm sure she figured I would be a general by then. Let's see, what else would you like to know?
Well, all right. Now, at Fort Custer, what did they do? Just sort you out at that point?
We just did various odd jobs around there, waiting to go someplace else.
Okay.
And after a few days, I was sent down to Jefferson Barracks in Missouri for Army indoctrination of drilling and a little bit of gunnery.
So was that essentially your basic training there?
I would say that was the basic training.
Now, at this point, were you assigned to, you eventually wind up in the Air Corps, you were just an Army draftee at that point.
I was just an Army draftee.
So the people who were there with you might be sent anywhere and to any kind of unit?
I guess this is true, yeah.
Okay. Now, did you have to do a lot of marching and that kind of thing?
Well, yes, typical, and formations and things like that. And Jefferson Barracks was just outside St. Louis, And it was pretty hot and damp there. In fact, I can remember vividly rinsing out underwear and socks and hanging them up, and they'd be as wet in the morning as they were when I put them there.
Okay. Now, what kind of guys were there with you?
What kind of
What
men?
kind? Yeah. Where were they from? How old were they?
They were various ages. I don't remember that we had time to get very well acquainted with anybody. We were busy most of the time, and I didn't start really getting acquainted with people till later on in my training.
Okay. And how well did you deal with the Army discipline?
With the discipline, I didn't mind that too much. I enjoyed marching, enjoyed, sometimes we did cadence marching and sort of show-off marching, and I sort of enjoyed that. Our first sergeant there was a tough guy, or our drill sergeant rather was tough, and but a nice fellow. And I'd only been there a relatively short time when I was transferred to Fort Lowry outside Denver, where I actually was in the Air Corps trainee, learning all about guns of various times, and including, and especially the 50 caliber machine gun, and the we did some bomb loading training, and enjoyed being Denver. People were exceptionally nice to us in Denver. Always made sure that on Sunday we got invited to somebody's home from church.
How close was the camp to the center of town?
Gosh, I really can't remember.
But was
We were close enough so that it was just a bus ride
Okay.
in. So it wasn't any great distance.
Now, at this point, did you know what kind of duty you would have?
No.
Would you be air crew or ground crew?
Well, assuming that I would be working on planes if I was studying bomb loading and 50 caliber machine guns.
So be working basically sort of on the machine guns as an armorer rather than as a
Basically
gunner
as
on
an
aircraft.
armorer, right.
Okay.
Maintaining this type of equipment. We did a given amount of skeet shooting to learn in case we had to end up being on an air crew to be able to do this type of things.
Right.
So that's all I knew at that particular time.
Okay.
And
Now, were they continuing with sort of drilling and physical training and things like that?
not too much, some physical training, but not too much. Basically, we went to school all the time. And after a given length of time there, I was transferred back to Missouri, to St. Louis, where then we knew for sure we were likely to be on planes because I went to Power Turret School, Sperry Power Turret School there, and began to get acquainted with people. They were from all over. One of them that I got real friendly with was from New Mexico, real big fellow, quite tall. Name was Kennedy. We got to be quite good friends, and I got acquainted with other people that were scattered around various places. And after graduating from Power Turret School, again I went by train to Kearns, Utah, outside Salt Lake City. And there it was a case of sort of advanced infantry training, just to get the training, I guess, in case we had to be a defensive unit of any kind.
Okay. Let's back up for a minute to the Power Turret School. Was there a particular kind of plane that these turrets were on? Was it?
These particular turrets would have been on B-24s, yes.
And
So
basically,
I almost
you were
knew at that time that I was going to end up doing something with 24s someplace.
right. And what you're doing is basically learning the maintenance and the operation of a power turret. Was that
Yes,
what you were doing?
yeah,
Okay.
repair and maintenance of them if necessary.
Okay. All right. So now they moved you, and you said they moved you onto Utah, and you're getting continuing training and some essentially infantry training at that stage. Were you doing anything else there, or was that just the field training?
You mean when I was in Utah
Yep.
then?
Yeah.
No, except for the fact that we all got acquainted with some very nice young Mormon girls,
Mm-hmm.
and we got invited to their homes, and I got a little inkling of what the Mormon religion was and what they believed in. The main thing that I remember is that they didn't drink coffee, and I didn't either,
Mm-hmm.
simply because I didn't like coffee. I never learned to like it. From there, we went to California, and by then I was pretty well acquainted with most of the fellows, and during the time we were in Utah, we had gone out quite a few times as groups.
Mm-hmm.
Out in California, we did nothing but sort of lay around. In fact, we wondered about the fact that they'd toughened us up in Utah, and then we were just laying around. But we did enjoy California. First time
yeah.
I'd ever been there.
Where in California did they have you based?
I don't remember specifically where it was. It couldn't have been a very major base.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about that before, and I
But do
don't
you think it
remember
was-
any specific name.
But do you think it was sort of in Southern California, down toward Los Angeles, or more northern? Or?
We must have been someplace in the vicinity of San Francisco or
Mhm.
Oakland,
Okay.
because on the Valentine's Day of 1943, we were marched down to the docks at Stockton, California, which again is relatively near Oakland, I guess. And we were in our winter ODs and carrying our gear, and it got hotter and hotter and hotter, and we were pretty well, we were pretty well exhausted just from the heat. But by the time we finally boarded, we left Stockton and went under the Golden Gate Bridge,
Mhm.
and that was the last we saw of the United States.
Okay. Now, what kind of ship did they put you on?
Oh, that was kind of interesting. It was the largest American passenger vessel that they had, and had been converted to troop carrier.
Mhm.
And if I remember rightly, this doesn't sound possible, but if I remember rightly, we were told there were about 10,000 aboard. I know we were packed in. We were down in the below water line,
Mhm.
the lowest possible deck, in hammocks, double-deck hammocks, which are very difficult to sleep in as far as I'm concerned. There was a door up above us that we went down, down to our area, and we were told in advance that if the ship was torpedoed, that door would automatically be locked.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't any point in any abandoned ship drills or anything like that. This was a little disconcerting, but we were young enough to take it, and that was that. During the trip, we got a chance to go up on deck every once in a while, and every week we were sent up there and could take all our clothes off, and they'd spray us with salt water.
Mm-hmm.
That was our bath.
All right. How did they handle feeding you on a ship with that many people on it?
We'd go up in turn for a mess hall,
Mm-hmm.
and that was kind of bad, because even though it was relatively smooth, a lot of people had never been on a ship and got seasick, and it didn't smell very good. You had to watch your step walking and so forth, and so We didn't really enjoy eating too much aboard the ship, but we ate enough to get along on.
Okay. Now, did they route you through the Panama Canal, or
No.
or where did you go?
No, from there we set out across the Pacific,
Okay.
all alone, no escort of any kind, relying on the ship's speed and zigzagging course, I guess, to survive, and landed in Wellington, New Zealand, and let some of the troops that were aboard ship get off. And from there we went around to Melbourne, Australia, let some more troops off, and that was the first time we'd been allowed off ship. We were allowed off ship and strictly told to stay in a given area and not leave. And so, of course, as soon as we could, we left and found a store and bought everything that we could buy and eat right away. And we handed some of our American money to the clerks. They didn't know what it was worth, and so they kept giving us change and giving us change. Later on, I found out that what change they gave us back was worth about what we'd given them. But we didn't know, and they didn't know. From there, we went to, incidentally, that was my second meeting with the MPs. After a while, somebody reported that we were not in the area, and so the group of us that went were picked up by MPs, driven through Melbourne rather fast on the wrong side of the street, which terrified us as drivers. And that reminds me, that was my second encounter with MPs. On the way across to Utah, we went through Cheyenne, Wyoming, and the train stopped. And I was quite a reader, and I'd read a great deal about the West, and Cheyenne was one of the prominent places in the West. And so I asked the man on our train, I don't know, you wouldn't call him a conductor, I don't know what you'd call him, but anyway, he said, well, we were going to be here at least a half an hour. So this was in midwinter, and so we were in ODs, except I didn't have my jacket on, or I didn't have my overcoat on or anything, and so I thought, I'm going to run down the corner and see what Cheyenne is like. I got down to the corner in time to hear the train pulling out.
Oh.
Well, I had no idea where we were going, because we were traveled under sealed orders as far as we were concerned. So I turned myself into the MPs, and they laughed about it and fed me and put me up for the night and put me on a mail train, and the next day, in the meantime, they found out where I was going. And they picked me up at the other end and took me to the camp we were going to be at, and just let me off, didn't say a word. And my friend Kennedy, who I mentioned, who was a big fellow, carried all of my clothes and my barracks bag and his barracks bag into camp, answered roll call for me, so they never knew I was gone. And the MPs in Wellington, New Zealand, did the same thing. They just dropped me off back where we were supposed to, not left, and so they never knew I was gone either. So I was very, very fortunate. Anyway.
Actually, I think that was Melbourne, wasn't it?
Melbourne.
Melbourne, yeah.
What did I say?
Wellington.
Oh.
You didn't get off in Wellington, but anyway.
I said what?
Well, you didn't get off in Wellington, you got off in Melbourne, at least that was...
That's correct.
Okay.
That was the first time we got off.
Now, once they loaded you back up again in Melbourne, what was the next stop?
Bombay, India.
Okay.
And there, again, they let us off the ship in groups. And it was my first encounter with absolute poverty. Beggars on the street, so many of them maimed in one way or other, without arms, without, which I found out later was a deliberate deal for beggars. And we also saw a funeral pyre with bodies being burned, and cattle walking in and out of stores, eating vegetables off the counters where people were selling, which amazed us. We were there a couple of days, I guess, get back aboard ship, sail to Suez,
Mm-hmm.
at the base of the Suez Canal.
Right.
And this was 20-some days later from the time we left.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we got there, we were put aboard old wooden, open passenger cars. We steamed up the Suez Canal and ended up at Heliopolis at a camp called Kilo 13, which was Kilo 13 because it was that far south of Cairo, Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
There again, we were just there a relatively few days, but had an opportunity to get into Cairo to see it, get into Alexandria to see it, went to see the pyramids and the Sphinx and got our pictures taken riding on camels. And, it was a very interesting time. The one thing I really remember about it, in addition to all those things, is that we slept on beds that were actually a framework with rope springs.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd tighten those ropes up as much as you could, and you'd go to sleep and end up with your butt on the floor because they would just expand.
Right. What did the Egyptian cities look like to you? I mean, you did seen Bombay. How did those compare?
I guess I can't tell you exactly as I remember what they looked like. Much like major cities, a lot more people around and almost everybody walking, very few cars. We did get I got an opportunity with several of the other fellows to go to a theater which was open to the sky, but which had doors which closed, much like some of our stadiums do now. I mean, that general idea. And I can remember yet, I saw the picture Pygmalion and enjoyed it very much, and have read about it since. Okay, from there, after a relatively few days, we went aboard trucks. In the meantime, of course, the British and the Germans had the Battle of El Alamein, and the Germans had been pushed back into Tunisia and beyond. And so we, at that point, got on trucks, and as we passed the area of El Alamein and passed through Tobruk, it was our first taste of war, because all along the highway were wrecked jeeps and wrecked trucks and wrecked tanks and areas with grave markers where they'd been buried as they fell. And we ended up in Benghazi, Libya, and then went to an airfield south of Benghazi. And we were there, I can't remember exactly how long, but from there we really got our first taste of servicing the planes, taking care of the machine guns, loading the tubs with belts of ammunition, and loading bombs. And the first time we had to change bomb loads at the last minute, I was more or less terrified, because instead of cranking them down like we'd crank them up, the older fellows that were training us just went and toggled the switches and dropped them down. And we thought, sure, we were going to get blown to pieces. And of course, by then we realized that the bombs were not fused. Somebody on the plane always had to fuse them after they got up.
Now, do you remember about when it was that you got out to Benghazi?
Well, let's see, we left the States in February.
Right.
We probably got to Benghazi in, I'd say March.
Okay, late March maybe.
Yeah,
Okay.
something like
All right.
that.
So at that point, the Germans, there's still fighting going on in Tunisia, but there's nothing going on very close to Benghazi.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct. Yeah.
Now, was there an established airfield there, or did you have to pretty much build one?
Well, we joined a bomb group that was already there.
Mm-hmm.
They were flying in, so they had been flying in support of the British Eighth Army.
Right.
Uh,
Now, the men that you're going out there with, were you organized into was it a full squadron with its own airplanes and things like that, or were you men who are going to be filling out a ground crew, or?
we were assigned a plane,
Mm-hmm.
and we lived near the plane in tents,
Mm-hmm.
and serviced the planes and took care of them when they came back, if they came back.
Mm-hmm.
At that particular time, they had the long-range Ploesti
Mm-hmm.
bombing of the oil fields,
Right.
and that was kind of tough on everybody because less than half of the planes we sent out came back.
Mm-hmm.
That was the so-called low-level bombing attack,
Mm-hmm.
and I also remember one of the planes that came in as a replacement had been donated by Kate Smith,
Mm-hmm.
and it was quite a thing to think that she had raised enough money to buy a bomber.
Right.
Of course, the bombers at that time maybe were at a maximum of $250,000, not $4 or $5 million like now, or more than that.
Now, about how long did they have you based in North Africa?
We were there until probably, let's see, March, April, May. We were probably there for only about May, June, July. We were probably there only about 4 months.
Mm-hmm.
During that time, the plane that I was working on was assigned to go to Palestine
Mm-hmm.
to get supplies, and I felt pretty lucky to be able to go and see Palestine,
Mm-hmm.
and didn't know whether we'd be there very long, but at least I'd be able to say I'd been there.
But you got to take a ride in the plane to go over there?
Oh yeah, well, as I say, I was not necessarily a part of the flying crew,
Right.
but I was part of the maintenance crew of
Mhm.
that particular plane. We hadn't been there more than a few hours when we got a radio message saying we should stay put because the Germans had flown in some paratroopers and dropped them near our field,
Mm-hmm.
and had blown up at least one plane, and the various anti-aircraft units that were there and our men were trying to hold off the Germans. And so I was lucky enough to spend a whole week
Mm-hmm.
in Palestine and went to see Jerusalem, Bethlehem, went swimming in the Mediterranean off Tel Aviv, and the officers on our plane had enough money to put us up in hotels while we were there, so I was very fortunate to have that. When we got back, we got all the tales from everybody as to all the problems they had. One of our men had been mounting a machine gun, and during the night he had heard the German paratroopers creeping up on him, and he'd yell halt, and then he'd mowed them all down with his machine gun.
Mm-hmm.
And in the morning found out that he had killed a whole bunch of goats,
Oh.
which was kind of nice. It really wasn't Germans, but eventually, by the time of the week was up, before the week was up, the British had flown in some Gurkha troopers, and the Gurkha troopers had a reputation among the Germans, especially in North Africa, of just leaving their rifles on their back, pulling their guns or their swords out or their daggers out and just advancing. And we were told that most of the Germans, instead of fighting, just surrendered then. But we missed all of that, fortunately, because we enjoyed what we were doing.
When you were in Palestine, did you get much of an impression about the people who lived there, about the different groups who were there, Arabs or Jews or Europeans?
Yes. Almost immediately I met an Arabic girl who worked at one of the offices there. She could speak, read, and write 8 different languages. We went to the beach several times together, but she had to be very careful about not being too obvious that she was with me because the Arabs would resent it. I corresponded with her a little bit after I got back and don't know whatever happened to her, but it was very interesting to have met her. Almost everybody we met was relatively friendly. I remember not having had milk for quite a while, and on the menu they had milk, and so I ordered it. It's always been my favorite drink, and it turned out to be goat milk. Pretty strong. It wasn't like any milk I'd ever had. One other occasion I hopped the truck and went into Benghazi to see what it was like, what the city was like, and I remember that the dock area was pretty well blown up.
Right.
There were ships in the harbor that had been sunk, but I missed the truck going back. Well, I didn't dare stay in there because the Arabs were all pretty poor, and there was a pretty good chance I might get my throat slit just to get my boots or something like that. So I hiked up across the desert, sort of going by stars. Halfway along, all of a sudden, I ran into another soldier who turned out to be a British soldier from Ceylon. He spoke excellent English and had been an overseer on a tea plantation in Ceylon. And so we walked the rest of the way through the night and managed to hit the camp. I've often wondered since what I would have done if I hadn't gotten to the camp, because I would have been out in the desert.
So you weren't going along a road or something like that?
Oh no, there wasn't any road that I knew of, so I just struck out across the desert.
Country. All right. What was sort of the daily life or the routine like in that North African camp?
Well, the routine life was getting up in the morning and going to the mess hall and having breakfast, finding out what bomb loads we were going to have, if any, that particular day, and getting back, and they would truck the bombs out on little trailers and pulled by a tractor deal, and we would load the bombs, crank them up into the plane. As I mentioned earlier, we'd fill the machine gun tubs with belts of ammunition, and the belts, the bullets had to be put in the belts, and there had to be every 4 or 5 bullets had to be sort of a flare light up, so
a tracer?
they would, a tracer set up, so they would, I mean, if you didn't have those, you would have no way of knowing whether you were getting near your target or not.
Right, so you had to go, so the bullets, they didn't come just preset in a whole bunch of things. You had to go and actually put them all in manually yourself.
Yes, and then alternate them. Once in a while, we'd have to go up with a new crew and make sure they knew how to operate them, because at one time, one of the fellows came back from a mission. He'd tried to fire his gun, and it wouldn't fire. And so I tried to explain to him how you did it, and he said, well, next time we go up on a training flight or something, you better come along. So I went along. He had put the shell in the machine gun, but he hadn't pulled it back and put it in the chamber itself. He just, in the excitement, he'd forgotten to do that. So there was nothing wrong with anything.
Did you ever get a chance to use your automatic turret training?
To do what?
You were trained on the automatic turrets. Did you ever fix those?
We never, for some reason or other, had any trouble with them. I've often thought about that since. We had trouble with a lot of things, with the machine guns and this and that. But I never had to tear one down or do any work on the power turret itself. So in a sense it was wasted training, but I'm glad that it didn't have too much trouble with anybody. The turrets were very interesting. They would have one on the top of the plane, one in the front of the plane, and a tail turret. And I went up a couple of times on occasion, and once I sat in the tail turret. That was cold. That was really cold. That reminds me, another time we got a supply of ice cream powder, and we had no way to freeze it, so we loaded into cans and took a plane up to 20,000 feet and froze it. And I have often thought people back home with no means of getting extra gas, and here we had to burn that much gas. But on the other hand, it was there to be used, and so that was that. So about the middle of the summer, we transferred to Tunis, or Tunisia rather, not the city of Tunis. We were stationed at outside a city called Sfax, also near Vidaville, I think. And it was a very nice level spot that we didn't have to do much to get our planes in. And we pitched our tents in sand dunes. It was the first time I'd run into sand, much like we have in Michigan here, almost identical. The Mediterranean was wonderful, and all we had to do was get out of our tents and run over the hill and down into the Mediterranean. But after we'd been there a few days, it started to rain. And we woke up one morning with it just pouring, and our shoes and everything else going out the tent floor because the water was coming in, and we had put our airfield on a dry lake bed. And so for a week or so, we could not fly because the planes couldn't take off. During that time, I had a lot of fun because I went out and one day I hiked up into the hills to a school, and I went into the schoolroom, and the teacher and I conversed in more or less sign language and a little bit of French that I could remember. And when he found out my name, he got all excited and went and pulled out one of his textbooks, and it was written by a Robert Gillard, same Gillard. Another time we went into Tunis itself, and I can't remember whether Carthage was part of Tunis originally in history.
The site of Carthage was pretty close to Tunis.
Yeah, well, I know, that's what I say. I couldn't remember whether it was in what was now Tunis or alongside, but anyway, it was a pretty good Colosseum there, much like the Roman Colosseum, not as good repair. And that also reminds me that one other day a couple of the fellows from our area came back with some ancient coins that they were real excited about, having gotten these coins marked 15 BC and marked 30 BC.
They were marked?
And they,
but it didn't say BC on them, though, I hope.
You know, when we said something about how did they know they're ancient, then they showed us. Well, I made the mistake of spoiling things for them. I said, well, how do you suppose they knew what date to put on there? They'd never thought of that. They probably still have the coins because, of course, they were counterfeit coins that they'd made just for tourists. But I thought it was rather interesting that they were really excited about these coins.
Okay. Now, at the time when you were based in Tunisia, where were they flying missions to?
Well, from the time we'd been in Libya, we were flying missions to Italy, primarily from Libya, from Tunisia. By the time we got up to Tunis, we were that much closer to Southern Europe. Then we were flying into Southern Europe, particularly into Austria. The only, as I said, the only big long-range flight had been the flights to the oil fields in Ploesti.
Right.
By the way, we found out afterwards that we never put those really out of commission. And several years later, my wife and I had a tour of Europe, and we drove past the oil fields, and they were shoving merrily away. No sign that there'd ever been any damage. But our flights from Tunis, from Tunisia, went a little bit further. On the Thanksgiving of '43, we boarded Liberty ship tanks, tank ships, and went across the Mediterranean to Italy, landing at, I started to say Benghazi, that wasn't it.
Brindisi? Or?
Brindisi and Toronto in that area. And then we moved up and we took over one of the main Italian air bases in Italy, near a town called Lecce, L-E-C-C-E. And there we flew our planes further north into Germany, and eventually bombed part of Rome, the marshalling yards for the airfields, or the planes.
Did you fly any support missions over Monte Cassino or any of that?
No, but our planes did.
Yeah.
We absolutely demolished it because the Germans, we thought, I presume they really were using it as an observation point for their artillery. But unfortunately, it just made a better place for them because they were able to defend themselves easier. And it took a lot of men eventually to get them cleared off. Again, I was lucky enough to go with my wife to see the casino. It had been since rebuilt, primarily by funds from the United States. And it was certainly interesting to see it, having been instrumental in a way of destroying it in the first place.
Now, what proportion of your missions do you think are the ones that you were equipping were heading up into Germany and Austria as opposed to places in Italy to support the combat troops? I mean, were most of them longer range missions?
We didn't fly many missions to support the combat troops because ours was, with the exception of the low-level attack at Ploesti, it was all from 20,000 feet or so. And it was pretty difficult to not get your own troops. So most of it was against ball-bearing factories, against oil-producing factories, against factories that we knew were making tents or building tanks. So it was not really in direct support of troops. It's too bad we couldn't have been more support at Anzio in particular, which was a disaster.
Did you make many attacks on marshalling yards and rail yards and things like that?
Well, as much as possible, yeah. The only one I remember specifically was Rome, because later on I had an opportunity to go up to Rome and see what we had done. And in fact, I got to Rome twice, and once a group of us were able to have an audience with the Pope, which was very, very nice. And another weekend, I got a furlough on the Isle of Capri, and that was fun. Italy, when we first got up there, as I said, we went across in at Thanksgiving time. Italy, when we got up, was cold and wet.
Right.
And of course, there's a lot of clay soil, so it was very difficult sometimes to walk through the wet clay. And as I can remember, I managed to scrounge 7 blankets. I slept on 4 of them and put 3 of them over me to keep warm. And we used to kid the Italian people about sunny Italy, and they kept saying, no, this never happened before. We'd never had snow before like this, or rain like this. They were right. The second winter we were there, it was gorgeous, just wonderful. Very little rain, beautiful weather.
What was the community like in the area around your base? I mean, did you see much of the local population?
Yes, yes. In fact, we hadn't been there very long when an Italian man came along selling vino. And we all bought a bottle of it, and it was terrible, I thought, just terrible. I never had cared for wine too much, especially red wine, which was what the vino was. So the next time he came around, I didn't buy one, and he wanted to know why I didn't. So I said, I think it's terrible. I mean, I got across to him that I thought it was terrible. And he said, see, because he wasn't selling any good wine.
Right.
So the next time he came around, he brought me a bottle of pretty good wine, and I enjoyed it. In fact, he had a friend who was a painter, and through his friend, and through this wine man, I was invited to their house, and they didn't have much in the way of food, so I brought supplies and things along, and had a spaghetti dinner with them, and was amazed to find out that they had meat in their spaghetti dinner, because I didn't expect that at all.
Right.
And they beamed and got across to me that they'd been able to catch a puppy.
Oh.
Naturally, I would not have eaten it had I known, but not knowing, I ate it, and as I remember, it was all right. There wasn't anything wrong with it. Not a thing wrong with it.
Now, about how large was the base that you were working at? An idea of how many
Oh, it was
squadrons were there? Or?
Pretty good size. We had ours there, and there was another unit near us that, incidentally, the only fellow that I had been through all of my training with ended up at this airfield just a few miles from us. And everybody else, including the man Kennedy that had carried my bag, ended up in Alaska. So I never saw either one of them again till after the war. My wife, when I went out and visited Kennedy and his wife in New Mexico, and I kept in touch with him. Let's see, did I see after we got up to Italy, by the way, I got out of my armament and went into headquarters as a clerk because they needed somebody who could type and somebody who supposedly had some college education or something. And there I met a man named Douglas Duffy, who was the only other one at the time in the office, and that's why they needed somebody there. I was happy to get out of armament, actually, and getting out of that, and got to be real good friends with Duffy. And my wife and I went and visited he and his wife in Washington, D.C. after the war once. He went after the war with the CIA, and we corresponded right up until 2 years ago, when all of a sudden the correspondence stopped, and all I can assume is that he died. And I often thought it was strange that his wife had never let me know, and I wondered if they might have both been killed in an automobile accident or something. I had never known, no way of knowing, of course. I suppose I could go through the information set up in some way or other to find out, but what good would it do me, really?
Okay. Okay. Kind of pull us back into your story here a little bit. Now, was Lecce the base where you finished out your time in Italy, or did they move you again after that?
No, we stayed there. That
Okay.
was an ideal base for us.
Mm-hmm.
It was in southern Italy, and it was relatively nice there.
Okay. Now, did you at some point get fighter units who would be attached to your bombers? Did they
No,
get escorts at
no.
all?
No, we would meet them sometimes. They would come from another field. Our field was always just bombers.
Right. Now, but there was now when they were flying a lot of these missions. I mean, did they have fighter escorts, or did that come?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, they would have fighter escorts.
No.
They would pick them up somewhere after the planes would take off
Mm-hmm.
one after another, and of course then, in effect, the early planes would have to stall
Right.
in the air till they got into formation,
Mhm.
and there was no use having fighters
Right.
using up their precious fuel at the
Mhm.
time, because they couldn't carry as much fuel as the bombers. So they were never met by escorts till they got over or at the borderline where enemy territory was.
Right. Now, over the course of the time when you were over there, they went from not having long-range fighters who could go all the way out to the targets with the bombers to eventually having Mustangs in particular that could do that. Now, were you paying any attention to that kind of thing going on, or were you noticing
Well, we would
changes?
know. They would come back and tell us.
Mm-hmm.
And
did
when it was quite a blow the first time jet planes attacked them,
Mhm.
because, well, you know, they're used to a relatively slow plane
Right.
attacking them, where they
Right.
could train their machine guns on them and shoot
Mhm.
some of them down, and these jet planes would be
Right.
right through, and we did get some of the pilots whose planes were lost, some of them got back
Mm-hmm.
in one way or the other, because they'd go down in the Mediterranean and be
Mhm.
picked up, or they'd go down short of the base, and so we'd get tales of what went on. And
Do you recall any planes being shot down over Yugoslavia and having partisans help them out and get them out?
That's rather interesting that you should bring that up. When we got back in this country, after we were married, we got acquainted with a fellow in Grand Haven and found out that he had flown out of our base
Mm-hmm.
to go back and pick up bodies and pick up wounded men, and he'd fly from our base over to Yugoslavia, land and pick them
Mhm.
up and bring them back. And it was kind of interesting that we would meet him and know that he'd been at our base.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, in some cases, some of the pilots or the air crew that survived might have landed there,
Mm-hmm.
but not that I know of that any came back to our base.
Yeah.
But
Well,
there were other bomb groups.
Right. Well, they may not have, in part because they would have been helped by partisans, and at that point, you wouldn't send them back over enemy territory, just because if they got shot down again, they might be made to betray something. So they tended to have their combat missions be over with after that. But part of why I was asking was, I mean, I known about some of these things going on. Was curious to see, is that something people were aware of on the base, or was that kind of kept secret from you?
No, we didn't know anything about
Mhm.
the partisans and the fighting in Yugoslavia. We knew nothing about that.
Okay. Now, did the fortunes of the bombers get better over the course of time? I mean, did more of them come back later in the war than earlier?
Yes, much so. The biggest losses we suffered were going after Ploas.
Mm-hmm.
That was big. Otherwise, we didn't lose that many planes
Mhm.
to enemy action.
Now, did you when you were still doing the air crew work, did you see planes coming back with battle damage and that kind of thing?
Oh, yes, yes. One of them came back on 2 engines. A B-24 cannot fly on just 2 engines, especially if they're on one side.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw a plane come back and land with 2 engines out on one side and 2 engines on the other side. It's one of those things. Apparently the pilot didn't know he couldn't do it and did it. Another occasion, one of our planes blew up on takeoff. Whether it had been sabotaged in some way or something went wrong there. And I remember vividly we went out picking up survivors and parts of bodies, and I remember picking up a shoe with a foot in it. And of course, parts of bodies hanging on some of the fences along the way. That part of it was hard.
Right. Now, did the Germans ever manage to attack the bases you were on, aside from that bunch of paratroopers?
No, just that one time. Just that one time. And we tried to maintain guards so that there wouldn't be, we'd have to take guard duty every once in a while. And in one case, we'd go around in jeeps from plane to plane during the night. By the way, I don't think you're supposed to have to do 12-hour guard duty, but we did. And I remember one time when I was in a jeep doing that, and we had the captain of our unit with me for some reason or other, I guess to see what was going on. About halfway through the night, I turned to him and I said, I can't keep awake. He said, oh, that's all right, I'll drive. So we switched seats, and I immediately went to sleep. He went to sleep too after a little while, and he ran into one of the planes and did some damage to it that had to be repaired. I was thankful ever since that it wasn't me, because nobody paid much attention to him having done it. But if I had done it as an enlisted man, there might have been some problem of one kind or another.
Now, how well in general did the enlisted men in your unit kind of get along with the officers? What kind of relationship was there?
Oh, there with one exception, I don't recall ever worrying about it one way or another. We never saluted them. We never, we called them by name if we knew them. The one instance was that a couple of us went down to the docks someplace. It may have been in Benghazi. And we were just in our fatigues. And some officer came along and bawled us out and wanted to know why we were there in our fatigues and so forth, and what our names were. And that was the only time I ever ran into this in any respect. Yeah.
As far as you can tell, were our officers that you were working with people who just kind of come out of civilian life like the rest of you? Were there some people you think were maybe career Army people, or couldn't you tell?
I would say almost all of them had come out of civilian life. I recall one instance where, for some reason or other, group headquarters wanted to know what the people had done before the officers in particular, what they had done. And so we ran a survey, and incidentally, the real commander each time would be one of the Air Force men, and our direct officers were the ones that ran the outfit there, but the commanding officer of the flying group turned out to have been what was he selling? He was selling something door by door anyway, and his top salary had been $35 a week or some such thing like that. Well, of course, $35 back then would buy a lot, you know, I mean, when you compare it. I also remember guard duty occasionally when we'd be out alone, and we had to try to keep alert, and the British had some troops near us, sort of guarding us, and these again were Gurkhas, and they had a reputation of being very, very good. And you'd be standing guard duty, and you'd be very cautious and try to make sure that nobody could creep up on you, and all of a sudden you could feel a prick in your back, and you'd turn around and you'd look into a big black face and great big white teeth. Cheerio, the only English they knew.
Okay, I tape here. Okay, now at this point we've gotten pretty well through most of the period of the war at this point. Are there other particular incidents from your career in these places that kind of stand out in your mind?
Yeah. Yeah, thinking back now as we're talking about this, I keep remembering things. One of the things about the Libyan desert, where we had our airfield, when we first went there, we had Army pyramidal tents, the sort of, well, they're square tents, and they were so hot that we couldn't stand it. So we got the British to give us their tents, which were smaller, but would have a canopy over them, so that the hot air would have a chance to get, and they were relatively comfortable as far as the heat was concerned, because it would get very hot there. I can recall when they told us that it was 130 degrees. And strangely enough, if you left water in your helmet occasionally at night, it would actually be frozen. It would vary that much. It would actually go down below freezing. Right. And occasionally when we were able to get a movie, we would have to carry our heavy clothes through all this heat to sit down and wait for the dark, and then we'd have to put all these clothes on to go back. And the other thing I remember is that we had a plague of locusts, like you've read about in the Bible, and it was unbelievable. They were so thick that the swarms of them would tend to darken the sky, and they were so thick that on the ground you would walk on them and it was like walking on something slippery. You really had to be careful not to fall. And occasionally during this small period of locust plague, some of the tents would collapse because of the weight of the locusts. And of course, in our lemonade and things, the coffee and things that we had to drink, there would be locusts that we'd have to pick out, and in our food we'd have to pick them out. And so I
were the locusts, were they at least vegetarians? I mean, they didn't attack people?
We didn't exactly know why they were there, because there wasn't much for them to eat. We were in a desert area with relatively little vegetation of any kind. It wasn't sand, you understand.
Yeah,
it wasn't
kind
sand,
of rocky.
but yeah, it was fairly hard grown. But fortunately, they were just there a few days and they were gone, except for those that remained that we'd squashed all over the place. What did I forget about there?
Compass?
Anything?
No, just the conus.
Yeah, okay. My wife reminds me, one of the things after I got in the office was that somebody had to do reconnaissance work with the locals, and we had an orchestra. Some of the fellows had were able to play instruments, and they were able to get instruments for them. So we had an orchestra, so naturally we wanted to have dances. So I went into town and found out who the head socialite was, and it turned out to be a woman named Hilda Dorajo. Her husband was an Italian baron, and she had a daughter in the teenage, and so she talked the other ladies into letting their daughters come to the dances. And of course I got pretty well acquainted with her and with her daughter and her friend, and being able to get a Jeep, I would pick up the daughter and friend and take them to the dance. Well, this horrified the old biddies around the place, and they complained about so much of me being able to pick up the girls without an escort that after a little while I couldn't pick them up any longer. And once I was able to take one of them to a theater, the Baroness's daughter, and a relative had to go along.
Right.
The other thing that my wife mentions, here I am, a hick from a little village in Michigan, and it was the first time I'd ever run into a fact that you go to some place and you press a bell, and the intercom says, yes, who are you, who do you want? And if they wanted to let you in, they'd say, well, we've pressed the bell, you can come in. I'd never run into this before. I thought this was really something. They had a beautiful apartment on the second floor. One of the things, on one of the times that I was there, I had to go to the bathroom, and I went in, and here was this outfit. They had a sink, and they had a toilet, and then they had this outfit alongside. I kept looking at that thing, thinking, what in the world is that for, you know? To wash your feet in or something? And finally my curiosity got the best of me, and one day when the Baroness and I were sitting alone, and her daughter wasn't there, I explained to her, and I said, what is that? And she laughed and laughed. Explained to me what a bidet was.
Yep. The American encounter with every day.
I felt like a hick, but I had never seen one. I'd never heard of one. So you run into some peculiar things. I'd never met her husband. Isn't that strange? I don't know why.
Well, how old was the Baroness? Or
I don't know how old she was, or he was, but she had a daughter who was 16 or 17. She was probably, what, in her 30s, or at the most in her lower 40s.
Well, you know, it's entirely possible that the husband could have been in the Italian army.
That's possible, yeah.
And wound up any number of places.
Entirely possible, yeah. That also reminds me that I was in a choir that we organized, and one Christmas, the King of Italy came down to Lecce to the cathedral there, and so we sang for the King of Italy, which was kind of an interesting experience, just as seeing the Pope certainly was, and seeing the Vatican. That reminds me of another thing. The guide that took us through the Vatican said, you notice all this statuary? Well, all of the pillars along the Vatican had little nude cherubs, obviously nude, and obviously male cherubs, and up at the top were angels. And the guide said, I want you to notice these. He said, after you get to be grown up, you got no possibility of going to heaven, because it's just the cherubs that change into angels. Let's see.
Well, did the environment or atmosphere going to change at all as the war got into its last stages? Did you just keep doing pretty much the same thing until the Germans surrendered, or were there changes over time there?
Right up until the end of the war, we kept bombing. Austria and Germany in particular. I don't remember our plane. Well, yes, of course, we would have bombed Romania and Bulgaria because they were allied with the Germans. But mainly we went after the big German places. And one of the main places we bombed several times, was the ball bearing plant at Wiener Neustadt, I guess it was. And, but otherwise, things didn't change too much. After the Germans were pushed further north is when we were able to go to Rome, and we were able to go to the Isle of Capri. When we first got up there, they weren't too far north of Rome.
Right. Actually, we didn't get to Rome until sort of June of '44. So, because we were on the casino line there when you first got there.
That's
that was just south of Rome.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. So it was after that, June of '44, that we went up to Rome a couple times. And again, my wife and I have traveled quite a bit since, and I remember remarking to my wife that some of the areas outside of Rome that I remember just being fields were now filled with big apartment houses. And that part of it had changed. But otherwise, while we were there, nothing changed except that the Italian people were able to get more food because we supplied it to them.
Right.
The other thing that was interesting is when we got there, nobody had any soap, and so of course soap was very precious, and you could get almost anything you wanted if you had enough soap. I mean, almost anything. And the other thing I remember is that when the Germans left, they must have taken all of the peroxide they could get to use as disinfectant. So here were the Italian girls with blonde hair, but underneath it was getting black because they had no means of keeping it blonde.
Now, at the point when the war ends, what was sort of the reaction like, either among the Italians or on the base or whatever?
Well, the war hadn't ended when we left.
Okay. When did you leave?
That was another interesting thing. The war was far enough along so we couldn't really do too much bombing because the Russian forces and the American forces were getting in there. So our bombing missions got less and less. And so we must have gotten orders to clear everything up. So we typed all of our information that we had to have as to who was going where and so forth. And on July 6th, if I remember rightly, we marched down to the docks. And the same ship that we had crossed the Pacific on was there.
Okay. Well, by that time, the war in Europe had ended, at least. I mean, the Germans surrender in May. So,
what did I say, July? I'm very sorry, May 6th.
Okay, just before the German surrender.
May 6th,
Yeah.
we boarded the ship. I'm getting all mixed up on my months. But it was quite interesting to me. And we had just passed through the Straits of Gibraltar on May 8th when we received word that the Germans had surrendered.
Right.
So it was that close from the time of our leaving. And the other thing about it was that the accommodations were much different. Duffy and I had a stateroom together. And the other thing that was really wonderful is that Red Skelton was aboard. He had been entertaining troops and he was going home also. And so almost every noon at mess time, he would be there going through his routine or just talking to us. And the thing I remember is that, of course, his routines were always good. They were always clean routines as far as language or anything else is concerned. But that he was just the same when he talked to you as he was putting on. He was just a wonderful man, just wonderful. Other than that, the trip across was very easy and there was no problem.
Was there a celebration on the ship when you found out that the Germans had surrendered, or were you still wondering if the U-boats knew about that yet?
Not really. We knew that it was pretty close, and we didn't get that excited about it as I remember. The only time I remember during all the time we were overseas was when we received word that Roosevelt had died.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was quite excited about that, whether we were Republicans or Democrats, because he had been a good president.
Mm-hmm.
And we knew nothing about Truman, of course. Nobody else did at that time either.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. I want to go back a little bit to conditions in Italy. You seem to be somebody who had a pretty strong sort of moral compass. That is, you kept yourself out of too much trouble most of the time.
Except twice.
Except those times. But that was really a lot of you just looking around. Were there discipline issues on the base? Did you have men who were kind of going off or carrying on with too many Italian girls, or getting into trouble, or too drunk, or?
Well, our mess sergeant had a girl there all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the fellows in my room, incidentally, we stayed in a castle, an old castle, when we were at the airfield there, and so there were several of us in this room, was the seamstress. I say seamstress because that's what I think of him.
Mm-hmm.
He had his own sewing machine and did mending for everybody, and this annoyed me no end. He used to bring a girl in at night, and she'd strip down and go to bed with him. That isn't the way I was brought up.
Nope.
And anyway, as to disciplinary problems, I recall none whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing that I can recall that we had any problem with.
Mm-hmm.
One time, I almost got shot. It was the only time I know of that a plane from Yugoslavia came over and strafed our place, and I happened to be out in the courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran. Those bullets were right behind me. And another time, somebody threw a bomb just as I had gotten in a place, and just a small one, a grenade of some kind. Other than that, even though we were only, maybe 20 miles from Yugoslavia, or 30 miles at the most, we never bombed Yugoslavia, and they never bombed us in any way. This was the one occasion I remember.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many aircraft the Germans had based over there. They tended to need them in other places.
Probably. Once the Germans were out of Yugoslavia, the partisans, I guess, had driven them pretty much out.
Yeah.
Once they were out, there would be no reason for them, or no way for them to keep planes there. But I always thought it was kind of strong that we never bombed them, and they never attacked us in any way.
Well, there wouldn't have been a lot of very good targets for high-level bombing over there.
No.
You didn't have much in the way of industry or anything else like that, and didn't.
It would be the same situation as trying to support our troops. We wouldn't know who we were bombing, really.
Right. Okay. Now, you make it sort of into May of '45, and they got you on the ship, and they send you back across the ocean. Where did you land when you got to the States?
You know, I think it was Hampton Roads, Virginia.
Quite possible. Ships went there.
We were so excited to get back, it didn't make any difference to me what we were back to. And we immediately were given 2 weeks leave. And I wasn't able to get in touch with my parents because everybody was trying to phone. So I remember getting off the train in Muskegon and walking to my house, which was roughly a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was sound asleep. I had to wake them up. They weren't there to greet me because they didn't know I was coming. And from there, when I went back, we all assembled in Sioux Falls, South Dakota,
Mm-hmm.
supposedly to reorganize to B-29s
Nice, yeah.
to go to the Pacific.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, we hadn't been there very long when Japan surrendered.
Mhm.
Let's see, Japan surrendered when, in August?
August, yeah.
In August. So May, June, July. Well, I guess we'd been there a month or so.
Mm-hmm.
Sioux Falls, again, was a very nice place, very friendly. The one thing I remember about it is a peculiar thing to remember. If you were going into Sioux Falls itself and you weren't coming back till after dark, you better take a raincoat, because it rained almost every night.
Mm-hmm.
If you were coming back before dark, you didn't have to take a raincoat. But again, the people were very nice, and when you'd go to church, and there was always there to have somebody invite you to meet them.
Mm-hmm.
The weather was nice when we were there. I spent most of my time in the office preparing papers for discharge
Mm-hmm.
of men who had a lot less points than I had.
Uh-huh.
I had accumulated, if I remember rightly, 141 points.
Yep, you should have been long gone.
And I was discharging men with less than 100.
Mm-hmm.
And that annoyed me a little bit. But everything else was fine there. Everything was fine.
And then you yourself got out, what, September, was that it?
Yeah, I again don't remember the exact date,
Mm-hmm.
but it just seems to me it was about around September 8th or 9th or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I took the train to Chicago and reported to Fort Sheridan.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got back just in time to re-enroll in the University of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And so I finished up there, majoring in history, political science, and geography.
There you go, fine choices. And then what did you do with that once you had it?
Nothing,
Okay.
nothing whatsoever. I came back, and my family was pretty well acquainted around town, and I was offered a job with one of the big insurance agencies.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like selling insurance at all. I was selling something that people were just going to use in a catastrophe,
Mm-hmm.
and that didn't appeal to me. And so I wasn't there too many months before I made an application to go to a paper mill, Muskegon
Mm-hmm.
paper mill, and in personnel. And I was accepted, so I became assistant personnel manager in the paper mill. And I stayed there till I was offered a job as assistant personnel director at Anaconda Wire and Cable
Mm-hmm.
in Muskegon. And there I stayed until I met my wife to be, which was an interesting thing because I was a boat enthusiast and had my own 21-foot sloop.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my bosses had a ticket for a Lincoln Day dinner. And I didn't particularly want to go. He said, "Oh, somebody ought to represent the plant. Why don't you go?"
Mm-hmm.
So I went, and I happened to get there a little late, and I sat near the back. And a girl was either there or came in, I can't remember that details. And she had a cast on her arm. And so we got to talking, and she had been skiing and had sprained her wrist or broken her wrist or something or other. And we got to talking about sailing, and she liked sailing, and I wasn't much of a skier, but anyway, there we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got married, and since I had actually traveled around the world, leaving from the Pacific and coming back on the Atlantic side, I sort of liked this travel, and I felt very fortunate, very blessed to have gone through the whole war without any serious injuries of any kind, and have seen as much as I did of a little bit of New Zealand, somewhat of Australia, something of India, something of Palestine, something of Libya, and something of the war part of it in Libya, and then in Tunisia, then in Italy, being able to see Rome and the Isle of Capri, and doing everything they did there, and coming back hale and hearty. I've always felt very blessed, and feel sorry for those who had to sacrifice when I was lucky enough not to.
Aside from sort of that better awareness of the world, how else do you think your time in the service wound up affecting you as a person, or making you different from what you were when you went in?
One of the things I think was meeting people from various places. One of the fellows was from Tennessee or Kentucky with a real broad accent. One of the fellows was from, well, I guess he was from Utah or someplace. Yeah, I guess he was from Utah. He was real different. All nice fellows, but each one with a different personality. And some of us, 4 or 5 of us, got together one Christmas and went in, I think it was either Utah or Denver, and had Christmas together. And corresponded for a little while after the war, but I just corresponded primarily with Kennedy and with a man named Duffy that I worked in the office with.
Right.
And I visited both of them, didn't visit anybody else. I don't think it changed me too much, because in Muskegon we had all nationalities, and I lived in an area where there were other types of people and who spoke other languages. So I really don't know that it changed me. Maybe it did and I didn't know it.
All right then. Is there anything obvious he's left out?
Nothing obvious. He's done a marvelous job, as usual.
I think so too. Well, thank you very much for taking the time
Well,
to talk
you're
to me.
certainly welcome, Jim. I appreciate being able to do this and hope it will be of interest to others later on.
That I can pretty much guarantee.
Good.
We will get a copy.
Yes.